it reminds me, for example, if you, as you do, but if you deal with very, very high level athletes, what athletes are very good at doing is compensating for problems.
Yeah.
So there's this, they might squat and their knee doesn't come in because they have a way to compensate for it that you maybe can't see. But when
Hmm.
you break down the tissues one by one, those compensations start to go away, and then you're left with what can the anatomy do and what can't it do, which brings us back to that FRA, which again, I want to also point out that it's not only cars. And then we have a
Of
whole
course.
another
Of course.
aspect of this assessment, um, which is active to passive ratios. So I think it's probably an important task for us to kind of explain
Yeah.
what we mean by active to passive ratios and why those are important to begin with.
It's kind of a conversation about range of motion, right?
Mm.
I think you mentioned it earlier, passive inputs and active inputs.
Mhm.
Range of motion is not, and I think you and Chivers actually did a podcast a while ago where you talked about this, and I think it's still not well understood, particularly by folks outside the system. But range of motion, to simplify it, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's going to have passive qualities to it and it's going to have active qualities to it. And those passive and active qualities have a lot to do with the behaviors of muscle and connective tissue. So how you discern and how you assess passive versus active, if you think about any uh, sport or lift that's obviously going to be an active movement pattern, there's a prerequisite to that, which is passive. You're not going to suddenly move into an active range of motion that you didn't have passively. It's physiologically impossible.
Mhm.
And so understanding like what a client needs to do and understanding why range of motion is often sort of bastardized to just stretching. If you
Mhm.
just stretch, and this is not at all taking away from stretching, because stretching is, you have a whole lecture on stretch physiology and how important that is, but there's a lot more nuance to it than just, if you have a range of motion problem, you just have to stretch more. And by the
Mhm.
way, the stretching is also often, I just thought of this, restricted to movement patterns,
Mhm. Yes, it
meaning
is.
meaning
Yep.
right, if you have a range of motion problem, just get into put your arm in a band over a pull-up bar, and just stretch this stuff,
Mhm.
right? Which is, again, it's not taking an internal perspective. And those of you that are taking the course or about to take a course or have taken a course with us before, if I do this overhead stretch, the prerequisite to that would be that I've cleared rotation. So it's, again, you're putting kind of a paint on the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I'm not saying that might not help, but if you have a rotational limitation because of how we explain and teach the shoulder, you need to address that first before you start to address linear capacity. So stretching, it has a lot of benefit if you do it in an intentional way where you're actually trying to, A, if stretching is the solution that needs to be implemented, but B, if you're doing it with consideration to what level of tissue am I stretching? Am I trying to stretch a capsule here? What
Mhm.
direction? Why would I be there versus you? What do you need to do with your hip compared to me? Versus here's a PDF with, 10 stretches that you can do for your shoulder problem. And by the way, the last 100 patients that came in here are given the same PDF, but they all have different shoulders.